Hi again. Hi, Allison. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's Conservancy Day program. We are happy all of you can join us. I am Ann Boucher. I'm the education coordinator for the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy, and we're really excited to have Allison Madison with us, who is the coordinator of the Wisconsin Saltwise program. I am going to share my screen. And I'm going to recommend before we get going that everybody make sure they are muted. And also make sure you have your video off because we're just in meeting mode. We aren't, this isn't a webcast. Great. Before we get going, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Friends. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. We've worked hard to help the city and county make the Conservancy the amazing place it is today. We advocate for the watershed, conduct education and outreach activities, and we have a major role in restoration of the land in the Conservancy. If you're not a member of the Friends, we urge you to join or make a donation. Every dollar is needed and put to good use. I will try to put the links to that in our chat session, in the chat section. We are currently in the second year of an ambitious Seed the Need campaign to raise $100,000 annually to create a platinum prairie in the new acre parcel addition to the Conservancy. A platinum prairie is comprised of more than 100 native plant species. This diversity helps restore the most robust prairie we can and provides a seed source for prairies all over Dane County. I'll put a link for donation also into the chat section. The Friends have been sponsoring these monthly Conservancy Day presentations for more than 10 years. They are held the third Thursday of the month from January to November. We began meeting virtually last September in 2020. This summer, we were able to hold 3 outdoor programs. It was wonderful to be out in the Conservancy and enjoying the beautiful summer weather. Next year, we'll hold some talks virtually and some, I believe we're going to be able to have in person at our meeting spot at Cromrie Middle School. You can see the recordings of past virtual programs on our YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the chat for that too. Before I turn this over to Allison, I'm just going to remind everybody of good Zoom etiquette. Please stay muted and please turn off your videos. I recommend that you use speaker view, then you can see whatever slides are being shared along with the person that is speaking. Put all of your comments and questions into the chat area, please. I'll watch for them and pose them all to Allison at the end of the presentation. I also need to inform you that this presentation is being recorded. Also, we would like to get your feedback on our Conservancy Day programs, and the link to that form is going to also be in the chat. And if pulling things out of the chat is a hassle, which I know it can be, I'm also going to send you a link to the recording and all of those links as a follow-up to this meeting. So without any more commentary, I'd like to turn this over to Allison.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks everybody for joining in this evening. I do want to ask a couple questions, and since we're all having videos off, maybe people could just use the little reactions down at the bottom of your screen, because I am curious, before the learning of today's program, has anyone heard of Wisconsin Saltwise before, participated in any of their Wisconsin Saltwise activities? So it's like maybe we've got a couple people. Great. That helps me a little bit. So yeah, so my name is Allison, and I started with Wisconsin Saltwise during the pandemic in June of 2020. And I became the first staff person of this partnership that had started in the Dane County area. And now, as the name would suggest, we are working statewide, trying to work statewide to reduce salt pollution into lakes, streams, and our drinking water, so both surface and groundwater. So I'm going to share just a little bit this evening about salt, its impacts on freshwater ecosystems, freshwater organisms, and then going to be sharing a little bit about some of the work that Saltwise is doing across the state and a lot of the successes that we've seen with municipalities from Middleton going outward, and also ways that community members and folks like yourself can join in on this work. So I'm going to share a few slides now, and feel free to pop things into the chat anytime. And if I don't catch, I know Anne's going to help me, and we'll make sure we get any questions answered. So, all right. A giant mountain of salt, right? Pretty crazy, but something that has kind of become the new normal, right? In winters in Wisconsin, in most of the snowbelt states. And I think people have just lost sight, or maybe never kind of fully recognized, that all of the salt that we bring into Wisconsin and put down on roads, all the salt that we bring in and we put in our water softeners, we use for anything really, all of that salt is going into our fresh water. And Pheasant Branch Creek is one of the water bodies in Dane County that has been designated as impaired with high chloride concentrations. And the way that we can stop that is to use less salt. I'm going to share a little bit about how that is possible, but it requires us to really think long term about our impacts on the land and what we're doing to our water, and not just kind of the immediate needs maybe of a particular storm. I'm starting out here with a graph of the cost of salt. Still pretty cheap. This last winter cost about a little over $80 a ton for the state. This is what the DOT pays and charges counties for salt. But it has almost tripled in the last 20 years. And that's actually kind of a good thing, because when things are cheap, we don't really think about them much, right? And those costs just become externalized, the cost beyond what you're paying. And since the cost has been moving up pretty steadily, the DOT, who uses the most salt in the state, right, on the order of hundreds of thousands of tons of salt a year, they're starting to pay attention. And this last year, they actually just published their annual report that they had a 30-year low in salt use. So I know in the northern part of the state was kind of a more mild winter, and but we had a good number of storms in the southern part of the state where we do use more salt per lane mile. And just to also clarify this 30-year low is based on amount of salt per lane mile. So there have been more roads put in the last 30 years, and that kind of affects the total, but this is a per lane mile 30-year low. So we are seeing some pretty big changes driven by the state. The state contracts out with all the counties, all the 72 counties in Wisconsin, to maintain the state highways. And they've really been a huge proponent of making sure that counties are using salt as efficiently as possible. And we're seeing the effects of that. And then we're also kind of seeing that trickle down a little bit as well, as counties work to share what they are learning with municipalities in the county. But we're trying to help accelerate that because we see the impacts not just to the pocketbook, but also on vegetation. Salt does a lot of damage to vegetation on the sides of the roads. Salt is extremely corrosive, and it prematurely ages our bridges and roads, and that causes about $5 billion of damage a year nationally. These are national numbers. AAA estimates the damage to personal vehicles is about $3 billion a year. And so a few different studies have determined that the cost of salt, while it's relatively cheap to purchase, the damage that it does when we take that all into consideration, all those externalized costs, salt becomes a little less cheap, right? For every dollar of salt we spend, we're doing what, $10 of damage. Sometimes we just aren't, we don't pay for that right up front when we're paying for the salt. And then of course, the reason we're here today is that all of that salt is going into our water, where it degrades our freshwater ecosystems. So how exactly does it impact the water and at what levels? I have up here a variety of numbers for you to take a look at. I would say naturally in Wisconsin, this first line shows that our chloride levels would be less than 10. Pretty much 0 across most of the state, but we do have a few areas where there are some ancient sea brines. And so there's a little bit of salt present there. But what the EPA has said is that if organisms are exposed to chloride concentrations, so salt being sodium chloride, chloride concentrations above 230 milligrams per liter, they're going to start to experience negative impacts. And the DNR has set our limit slightly higher than that at 395, saying that Wisconsin organisms are a little bit more tolerant than some that we might have in other parts of the country. And then they've also set a secondary limit for acute exposure. So the chronic exposure means if an organism's in that salty of water for a period of time, like several days, it will impact the organism. And that acute exposure is just like for a short amount of time. If the water you're in is that salty, it's going to impact the organism. And in the southeastern part of Wisconsin, where we have the saltiest water, we're seeing some concentrations extremely high in the thousands of milligrams per liter. So some pretty heavily impacted streams in our highly urbanized parts of the state are, getting close to 10 times over that acute exposure limit. And if milligrams per liter aren't necessarily the most kind of common to you right now, we like to talk about teaspoons and gallons. So 1 teaspoon of salt would pollute 5 gallons of water up to this 395 limit of chronic exposure. So we like to tell people if you can save a teaspoon of salt, like you're protecting 5 gallons of water. So shared a couple photos here. This research is coming out of the University of Toledo. Bill Hintz is a researcher there who spoke last January at Salt Awareness Week. And he's doing some studies here showing that high salt concentrations are going to decrease rates of growth. They also negatively impact reproduction, increase organisms' susceptibility to parasites. So salt is a stressor to our freshwater organisms, just like it would be a stress to any of us if we were only drinking, salt water. The most sensitive species in the ecosystem tend to be the zooplankton. So if zooplankton populations are going down, that means less food going up the food chain. It also means that there's less predation on algae. And so our water will get greener and murkier as it gets saltier. Another thing to consider in our lakes is that saltwater is more dense than freshwater. And so as we have salt loading into the lakes, we start to form a dense salty layer at the bottom, and that can inhibit natural lake mixing or seasonal turnover, which is pretty impactful at the ecosystem level because that seasonal mixing helps to redistribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the water column. So this is a picture of an article in New York State, upstate New York, where there's a lake that's no longer undergoing that seasonal mixing. There are some lakes that have gotten this salty in Minnesota as well. To my knowledge, we do not have any lakes in Wisconsin that have been impacted at this level, which is great. We just want to keep it that way. So this is kind of giving you a little bit more of a statewide perspective. Again, like I said, chloride concentrations naturally would be pretty much 0 across the state. So those dark purple dots, which we don't see across the state anymore. So we're seeing chloride concentrations in moving into like the the double digits and triple digits in southern Wisconsin, and then especially around the Milwaukee area. This kind of salinity plume is coming out of Marshfield, trying to track down now actually the sources of that. This data was put together by Madison, Dane County Public Health. So in the city of Madison, when they started salting in the early 60s, somebody actually said, hey, maybe we should take a look at where all that salt is going and how our lakes are faring. And so this is actually some of the best longitudinal data that I've seen. And since everyone's pretty familiar with the lakes, you can see that, Lake Mendota is the largest. That means it has the greatest ability to dilute the salt coming in. Lake Winger, the smallest, very highly urbanized landscape, least ability to dilute that salt, higher salt concentrations. Again, measured here in milligrams per liter of chloride. So I was able to pull some data or borrow some data from Hillary Dugan, who's a professor at UW-Madison. She had a student, Linnea Rock, who just graduated last year with her master's degree. And she was looking at chloride concentrations in the Ohara River watershed. And she had pulled some or collected some data on Pheasant Branch Creek chloride levels. And I got this one data set from Hillary. I do believe there is at least another place that Linnea was measuring and wasn't able to determine for sure. I did go out with her once where she was collecting data by kind of behind the Witch Witch, like over near Greenway. And I'm not sure if this was that study site, so I'm trying to figure that out. But we are seeing chloride concentrations here elevated throughout the year, and then peaks in February of 2020, February and March of 2021. So when we have snow melting, carrying that melt water with salt, moving into the stream is when we see those peaks going up above the EPA chronic toxicity level, but not the DNR level. So I've got those two lines on there. And again, this is chloride in milligrams per liter. And another thing I draw people's attention to is that we do have a couple lower levels here, but for the most part, chloride concentrations in the creek here are not going down much below 100 milligrams per liter for most of the year. And that's because since we've been salting our fresh water for decades now, some of that salt has made its way into soils and groundwater. And so we are recharging our streams with salty water throughout the year. And again, this is a map of Wisconsin that shows chloride concentrations in groundwater across the state. And this data all came from the UW Stevens Point Well Water Viewer. So this is available online. If you just type in UW Stevens Point Well Water Viewer, you can look at a variety of different water parameters. I just chose chloride, and all of this data is amassed from different private wells across the state. So it's all from rural areas, not more urbanized parts of the state. So we're seeing this urban and rural chloride concentrations have become elevated. And I zoomed in here just kind of for fun on Wood County, where I saw some yellow dots. So this is just showing us the township level. And then you can also zoom down to the section level, and kind of underneath some of those what averaged out to be yellow at the township level, we have some red dots. So over 200 milligrams per liter of chloride, which is getting close to, there's actually an EPA taste threshold for chloride, which is 250 milligrams per liter. So probably wouldn't be too excited if my home's, was getting water that was starting to taste salty. And I also threw on this page some of the other inputs of chloride. So I mentioned road salt, water softeners, fertilizers, potassium chloride fertilizers, that chloride anion. And so again, that's another source of chloride into the water. And then dust suppressants that are sometimes used on gravel roads include calcium chloride. So again, bringing a couple of those chloride ions into the water. So I mentioned the last slide was all showing us data that had been gathered from private wells. we see in the city of Madison, the average chloride concentration in our municipal wells is steadily increasing. And the top whisker here is from well 14, fairly close to Middleton, right by Shorewood, kind of Spring Harbor Middle School, I believe. Oh, and I also grabbed some data from the city of Middleton, since I was thinking a number of folks here probably in the city of Middleton. And this is their latest chloride data from municipal wells. So we've got milligrams per liter, and some of them are very low. One here at 84, and then one up to actually 160. So that was Hillcrest. And I didn't go back or try to look at on a map where exactly these wells all are. I'm kind of wondering, Greenway, is that, higher because if it's near Greenway Station, maybe there's a lot of salting that goes on in that commercial district. Also, of course, interested in this Hillcrest data. So I was able to get from the city some historical data as well. And just, really interested to see that this Hillcrest well is just going up by 10 milligrams a liter every year. So yeah, just something to, keep tabs on. I feel like our municipalities would be well served to start to share some of this information out with the public so that citizens and businesses know that this is an issue that we all need to work on to protect our shared resource of fresh drinking water. So that's really what the Solid Waste Partnership is trying to do. Like I said, it started in Dane County with the organizations that you see there. And then, as I mentioned, starting to work statewide, connecting with different watershed groups across the state, stormwater partnerships. And thanks to some grants from the Fund for Lake Michigan, we are working statewide this year in 2021 and in 2022 as well. So Saltwise is really saying we need to rethink the way that we're doing winter maintenance, the way that we're salting, period. And one of the ways to do that is just sharing the success stories of communities that have made some really significant changes. So just north and east of us in DeForest, they sent their crew through a Saltwise training class and went in and calibrated all of their trucks. Seems like a pretty basic thing, but like I said, salt has been cheap for a long time. And so it wasn't necessarily at the top of the list to calibrate vehicles and make precise, applications of salt. It was just like, let's put some down, let's salt, oh, let's crank her up, right? And now we're saying, if we need to use salt, okay, we can do that. It is a good de-icer, it keeps our roads safe, but let's only use it as needed. Let's put down, 300 pounds per lane mile and know that we're putting down 300 pounds per lane mile. Another thing here I've bolded is the term pre-treatment. So pre-treatment, the best type of pre-treatment is actually to put brine down. So salt brine before the storm. It works like putting oil on your skillet. It prevents that bond from forming between the snow and the pavement. And so just like if you oil your skillet at home, you bring a spatula, your food comes right off. If communities can do some brine pre-treatment, the plow blade comes through and the snow comes off for the most part. Sometimes communities don't even need to put any rock salt down afterwards. So it is an application of salt, but it's a lot less salt than if you don't put that down and then you're using a ton of rock salt afterwards. I shared that I would tell you a little bit about what the city of Middleton is doing. So in Middleton, they have made some investments in smart trucks. So I have a little photo here in the top left where you can see maybe, I don't know how small it is on your screen, but salt and then the term or the number 300. So this is a set amount of pounds per lane mile. So this truck will be putting down 300 pounds per lane mile. And that will be regardless of what speed the truck is moving at. So it's smart enough that when the driver's slowing down, the salt auger and spinner are going to slow down as well. If the truck stops, it stops salting. I think we've all come up to intersections before where there's a pile of salt And I'm not going to blame an operator for that because they've got a lot. I'm happy that they're staying on the road, hopefully staying safe. They got cars weaving in and out. Who knows what conditions they're out there in. So I think we really do need to have smart technology in place that can help them do salting right. We also see brine. Maybe you can see the term brine right beneath that. So this is actually brine that's being mixed in with the salt, right, as it's going down onto the pavement. And so that is called pre-wetting salt, and it helps to activate it. So salt needs to be exposed to liquid to actually start melting. And so it's activated. Once it goes down, it's going to start melting. And also, it's going to help that salt stick in place. A lot of times salt can bounce off the road, depending on, the conditions. And when it's wet, it goes down and it stays on the road surface where we want it to be and where it can be effective in melting snow and ice. So you can see that in bolded here at the bottom, that these improvements have allowed the city to reduce their salt use by 50% per storm. So of course that's, helping out our taxpayers, using less salt on every event after those, obviously initial capital costs. So it's not just municipalities. We are also working with private contractors. If you're in the Middleton area, Madison area, you're probably pretty familiar with the Bruce Company, and they've made some changes to the way that they do winter maintenance. They've sent staff to training. They work to calibrate their equipment, and again, using brine for anti-icing. So here we see a pretty big brine truck. This is the little brine boom where it's coming out. And then they're also filling up here some little sidewalk units to actually anti-ice on the sidewalk. So sometimes, like I mentioned before, if you anti-ice, it means that folks do not need to come back again and salt. So kind of thinking about like, what's the next chapter? How can we continue to do things better? So big part of that is education. This is a photo from a training that was held in DeForest last month. And we also hold a number of trainings virtually. This fall, we had 9 different equipment open houses across the state, where we primarily were working with municipalities and getting municipalities that are leaders in salt reduction to share what they're doing with others in the area. And another form of getting the word out, we've been hosting virtual webinars, so Wednesday webinars over the noon hour. These are all available on our YouTube channel if you want to check any of them out. So some of them are geared a little bit more towards winter maintenance professionals, with one that was with a number of private contractors in town. We had the Mayo Clinic webinar was with their facility manager. On December 8th, we've got someone from the town of Lynn near Lake Geneva who's going to talk about communities want to get started on brine and don't have a lot of money to do that. How can they kind of dip their toes into this? So yeah, a lot of them geared a little bit more towards the professionals, but we did have one just a couple weeks ago, or last week maybe, with Mike Rupiper from the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. So he talked about the work that's being done in the Starkweather Creek watershed just on the east side of town. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we had Salt Awareness Week last January, worked with a number of our partners across the state to put on a series of webinars over the noon hour. And we'll be doing that again this coming January. And, through our social media, always trying to share these success stories, like the one pictured at the right here, Ho Chunk Gaming, cutting their salt use by 70%. So really incredible. Then I've got a photo here from the Orton Front Music Festival on the east side of Madison, talking to folks. We went out and we made little doggy bandanas, or folks could make their own doggy bandanas and t-shirts to kind of help spread the word about salt. And then I threw in a photo here from a Saltwise paddle event that we held with the Pheasant Branch Conservancy in late September September, maybe mid-September. So we had a gorgeous sunset on the creek. We kayaked up there and grabbed some water samples. And then, you know, of course, if you see the sunset on the water, it means the sun is done and down before you get back. So we had a pretty dedicated crew that stuck around after the sun went down and took a look at the chloride concentrations that we found in the creek. So I do want to throw a couple slides in here. I know we're talking primarily about road salt. Water softener salt isn't really contributing to Pheasant Branch Creek, but it is a contributor downstream. The Madison wastewater treatment plant is one of about 40 wastewater treatment plants. So that's what WWTP is, wastewater treatment plant. There were one of about 40 in the state that have chloride variances, meaning they're getting a lot of salt. So, you know, we've got about 100,000 homes in the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District sewer shed. And most of those homes have salt-based water softeners. And so all the bags of salt that you're putting in your water softener, they make their way to the wastewater treatment plant, and it's, you know, salt dissolved in water, and they cannot pull that out. And so it gets discharged into streams like Badfish Creek, Badger Mill Creek, and the DNR says, hey guys, you're dumping a lot of salt into the creek. That's not good. And they're like, yeah, we know it's not good. And so it's like, well, can you try to tell people to use a little less salt? So that's part of why I have a job, is that it's kind of hard for wastewater treatment plants to help educate the broader community. And so they are, you know, doing some work with larger partners, but they're also running a couple pilot programs right now in the village of McFarland and the town of Dunn. But they don't have the funds to really do a lot across the sewer shed. So it would be great if you could, you know, take a look at your water softener. I'll give you a couple of tools and tips and tricks for that as well. Oh, I guess I could also explain here what else is going on beyond the orange dots. You see that the orange dots in the state are largely over those dark blue areas. So dark blue here on this map is just total groundwater hardness. So when our groundwater is sitting in calcium carbonate, so limestone, dolomitic limestone, when we pull it up, that calcium and that magnesium come up with it. And so it's in areas where we have a lot of hard water and people therefore use water softeners, that all that salt is moving to wastewater treatment plants. So just a couple of pictures here from an outreach event that we held with Saltwise. We got actually 3 water softeners, old water softeners, converted them into buoys, put them out on Lake Wingra, worked with Tyler Leeper of Madison Boats, had some press coverage, got an article in the Wisconsin State Journal talking about the impacts of water softeners. So really do feel like right now the biggest piece is awareness. Most people don't realize that the wastewater treatment plant cannot remove that salt. And so one thing that you can do is work to make sure your water softener is running as efficiently as possible. We can also look at brine reclamation, especially in larger buildings. It's a little trickier at your own home, unless you're pretty mechanically minded and want to deal with waste brine, but you probably don't want to, you know, store that much of it. But then there are salt-free alternatives. I'm happy to share more information about those if folks are interested. I did put a picture in here of Mike Gresh, who is the facilities manager at the Lucky Building in downtown Madison. And he does have a couple of huge water softeners there because it's a pretty large building, residential, mixed use, residential, commercial. And so he grabs and stores a lot of the waste brine from the water softener. And then you can see this little tank in his Bobcat behind him. He uses that softener brine discharge to do anti-icing on the property. And so he'd been buying, you know, a bunch of salt for water softener, buying a whole lot more salt for winter de-icing, took the class and said, hey, like, I don't need to, you know, buy salt twice. Why don't I grab that waste salt? And so that's what we started doing. Wastewater treatment plant loves him. So what can you do to be a saltwise advocate? So I would say, join in on some of the talks during Salt Awareness Week, tell others about those, promote the trainings that we have. They are all free for winter maintenance professionals. So like I've shown you, we have a number of both municipalities, private companies in the Madison area that have attended, but there are definitely a lot more private companies that we could get to come. We invite school districts and institutes of higher education, business owners, anybody who has a say in winter maintenance to attend those. They are 4 hours, so if that's a little much to begin with, people can check out our Wednesday webinars, either live or archived on the YouTube channel that we have. If you're interested in doing some chloride monitoring, the Isaac Walton League has a national salt watch program, so you can actually get free test strips to go out and monitor chloride concentrations near you. And if there is energy to do that amongst the friends, I would say to kind of work to do that in an organized way, and and contact me, and I'm happy to help kind of coordinate some of that. There is a second year of monitoring happening in Starkweather Creek watershed right now, actually, with the Friends of Starkweather Creek and the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission and others. And then I would also say, you really have a voice. So use that to share this information with friends and family. Again, if the friends group would be interested in doing a little bit more of a campaign with some of the kiosks that you have in the Conservancy, getting door hangers out, like the ones I have pictured on the right, reminding people, if you put too much salt down, sweep it back up again. Don't just let it sit there and move into our water. And then very, very simple way that you can help spread the word would be to follow us on social media and just like and share our posts. So that's what I have for everybody. I will stop screen share and you can ask any questions you have. It looks like we've got a few comments in the chat, but Anne, I'll let you kind of manage that.
So thanks. That was great. We do have a couple comments, and Rick's been answering some things, but maybe there's room for you to add to his answers. But one person said she gets the impression that drivers are relying on salt to clear the roads in lieu of driving defensively. What's the take on our expectations as we set out?
Yeah, so I mentioned that, in the state of Wisconsin, we do have more roads than we used to 30 years ago, but there are some graphs that show, the number of roads going up and then the amount of salt used going up at a much, much faster rate. So we have a little bit of a problem where, since as municipalities have been relying on salt and just more salt and more salt and more salt, and then social expectations for that level of service have continued to climb as well. And I would agree that people don't want to drive any differently in the winter than they do, any other time of the year. And so part of the Saltwise message is to be a safer motorist. And so when we're speaking, just trying to tell people to slow down and also, maybe stay off the road. If you don't have to go to Target in the middle of the snowstorm, just, hang out. I think one thing that COVID has taught us is that we, can work remotely, right? So choosing to do that and just stay off the roads, it helps everybody. But that's, sometimes a hard sell, right? When the expectation is you should be able to go anywhere, anytime.
Yeah. Somebody else brought up the use of beet juice with brine. And do you know if that's being used anywhere around here? And
so when I say brine, I do mean, it looks like maybe Rick answered there, 23% salt to water. And beet juice is talked about sometimes. More commonly, municipalities and even counties are using beet heat, which is a proprietary product that I think does have some magnesium chloride in it, which, so to kind of muddy the waters a little bit more, salt is pretty effective down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Below that, we really want people to stop using salt because it's not effective. So you put salt down, it's really cold, it's not melting. You can't just put more salt down. It works so slowly that you really want to switch to sand for traction But there are other options available for municipalities to buy things like magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, these cousins of sodium chloride, still have chloride, so they're not environmentally friendly by any means, but they have lower melting points. And so they can use those products to keep roads more passable at lower temps. But I diverged a little bit there. So to get back to beet juice, beet heat is a product. I think it does have some beet sugars or some sugars in it. The problem with switching and saying, okay, where you can use like beet juice, or some people talk about pickle juice, cheese brine, all of these things are organic, right? Meaning they have carbon in them. And that carbon is food for us, right? We eat everything with carbon, and also microbes. And so when that beet juice or pickle juice would make its way into the water, little microbes are going to decompose that, eat that up. And when they do that, they're pulling oxygen out of the water. And so then dissolved oxygen levels go down for fish and other aquatic organisms. So there's really no like silver bullet of like, let's use this thing and we won't have any problems, right? Sand causes sedimentation, salt, you have the toxicity of chloride. Organic products have their issues as well.
Wow. Somebody else would really love to hear about the salt-free alternatives for our water softeners at home.
Well, yeah, so there are a few different options out there. And I actually have a group of students who are, I think they're senior, like environmental design students at Purdue, and they are engaging in some testing of some salt-free alternatives. They're just kind of coming up with their plan right now. But there are alternatives that are on the market. I think people have been concerned that it's like snake oil, like, is this thing really working? With your salt-based softener, you see the salt go in, you see the salt go down. It's the conventional method. And so people trust that. And I think there's also, concern that if you're not maintaining your water softener and using this conventional system, what sort of damage might happen to your pipes. And so I can't recommend a specific brand, but I would say that the type of water softener that I shouldn't say softener. So water softeners, you soften water when you add sodium. So when you're adding salt, you're softening your water. But we can treat the water, different water treatment devices that can help deal with the hardness problem, which is why we use water softeners to begin with, at least here in Madison. And one of those systems, actually, you wrap it, you just don't do it on your own, but there's a device where you wrap this coil, electrical wire around the water pipe, and it sends a pulse through the water. It's called an EMF, electromagnetic force device, and it changes a proton spin so that the calcium and magnesium don't bind with carbonate and form that scale. And so that calcium magnesium, they're still there in the water, but they're not forming scale along your pipes. And that has worked really well for a homeowner on the east side of Madison that I was able to interview this fall, or I think maybe this summer. And he's had this device for 12 years in his house and hasn't had any problems. So I'll actually I can put that little video, I think, in the chat. Maybe I can grab it right now. Or actually, Anne, you're going to send links out, right? So if I send it to you out later, we can.
Yeah, I'll include it. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think I might have that now. Yeah. So I've got that on. It looks like Rick already sent out that link, but I'll put that in there again in our home water softener page. Just like a couple paragraphs down, there's a little video of Luho Shablonsky speaking about his salt-free device.
Why aren't those more commonly used?
So Wisconsin is like the home of water softening. I think, there are a lot of names that, we see in our water softener, and we see them on, streets around town, right? Like this is kind of the epicenter of salt-based softening. And so we have an industry that's made a good amount of money, continues to make a good amount of money on this. And so, I mean, I don't think the blacksmiths weren't like really excited to have the car come to town, right? So there is resistance to change there. Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
something
where,
that I learned recently about water softening is that in Europe, it's illegal. Like, you cannot soften your water down to zero, like 0 grains per gallon, like 0 calcium magnesium. But in the US, like that's considered the standard. It's like softening water means taking all of the calcium magnesium out. It's like calcium magnesium is actually good for you in your water. And it is pretty high in this part of the state, but we don't necessarily need to bring it down to 0, right? Uses more salt that way, but that's like what the standard is.
did I miss it? If we're moving the calcium and magnesium out and putting sodium in, dissolved sodium into the water in its place, how much sodium and chloride then are we drinking? Like,
Mhm.
is that problematic? Are there standards?
Yeah, so you really want to make sure that you're not drinking softened water. You don't want to be drinking softened water. And the Madison wastewater treatment plant will actually send you little test strips. Actually, these are not the right test strips. They will send you test strips if you are unsure if your tap water is softened or not. You also want to make sure that your outdoor hose bib is not softened, because then you would be salting, your yard. But usually we're just salting like hot water, like your shower, other taps, but hopefully not your kitchen. The water that comes through your tap, if you send it through a water softener, it's pulling out the calcium and the magnesium. Those are positively charged, and it's putting sodium in its place. So the calcium and the magnesium, along with that chloride that was in the salt, those all just get shuttled, discharged to the wastewater treatment plant. So none of the chloride's coming into you, but the sodium is.
Wow, that's really an eye opener. More people need to know about this. I don't know if there's any more questions out there. People have been saying thanks, and Rick's been helping us. Rick, do you have anything to add?
Just because we're talking about the water softeners. So when I moved into my house 25 years ago, it has a really old water softener, and it was just amazing how much salt it seemed like I'd have to load. I loaded probably maybe four bags of salt in a few months, and it's like, this is a lot of work, and I'm kind of lazy that way, and I just disconnected it. And now there are ramifications for disconnecting a softener. So I've had to replace faucet, the faucet heads a couple of times, and some of the different fixtures, and I think my bathroom shower I replaced once, but it's saving a lot of money on salt. It saved a lot of reduced the amount of salt that goes downstream into the wastewater treatment plant, and I don't have to lug 40-pound bags of salt down into my basement. But that you have to be aware of that there are ramifications for not doing that, and if you've got high hardness, you might need to consider something. But there are a lot of other good alternatives.
Thanks. We had unfortunately a little distortion on what you said, Rick. So I don't know if anybody else had that problem, but I think it's going to show up in my recording. I don't know if you have a minute or two, Rick, and you could put some of those comments together, and I'll also send those out to people with my email, because I think you gave us some good information that it was a little bit hard to hear. Anybody else? What's the next steps, Allison? So do you want to get a more robust monitoring program going on? Would that benefit you to have that data going, especially here in the Pheasant Branch watershed?
I mean, I think if folks are interested in doing some data collection, the problem with chloride data collection is that, it's great to get out kind of after storms. Also, during maybe a warmer winter day when there's that snow melt. But not necessarily everybody wants to be trekking down to the creek, in those times. So if folks are interested though, I think, yeah, it would be great to know, and we could try to get some more monitoring. There are a few of us who are talking about trying to do that strategically in the Madison area this winter. If anyone lives over by Starkweather Creek, they already have a program in place and they are actively looking for more monitors. But yeah, I think just, like I said, sharing, telling more people about this issue, taking a look at your water softener if you have one at home. Like the link that I put in there, I think same that Rick put in, is a great place to start for a self-diagnostic for your water softener. And then, like I said, this winter, just kind of sharing the message about salt.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. Do you have any other final comments, Allison, before we sign off? Nope. Okay. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you so much for coming and talking to all of us. We really appreciate your time. And I'd like to let people know that our next Conservancy Day that's coming up is in January on the 20th. And we're going to have Fred Clark coming from Wisconsin's Green Fire Voices for Conservation. And he's going to bring a wolf biologist with him who works for Green Fire also. And they're going to talk about the wolf introduction, sort of the issues with that. Not so much the biology of wolves, but sort of what's going on politically and where things are there. But with all of that, I want to thank everybody else for joining us, and especially, again, Allison, that was fantastic. I guess with that, we can say good night.
Bye, thanks.
Have a good evening, everybody.
All right, thanks, Anne.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. If there's anything else that you are interested in sending out to people, any other links, just forward them to me and I'll pass them on.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good night.